Because the world is passing away, passing away, passing away. The songs that were popular last year aren't popular this year. That whole system designed by the enemy is always dying, always going down. So if your heart's in it, if you're clamoring after identity in that system in any way, even as a Christian, then you're always at a funeral emotionally. Because you never can get there. You're never high enough, you never got enough, you're never known enough, you're never effective enough. The greatest surprise you can have is the people that you think have it together. You see them on television. You see them doing things at the front. You see them working miracles in the name of Jesus. And you get to know those people and you find out, in many cases, they're extremely insecure and you cannot believe it. You say, man, if anybody ever had it made, he has it made. I mean, he is pretty, he is good, he is articulate, he is everything everybody ought to be, and he's shot through with insecurity and you can't believe it. One of the greatest revelations we get in a school like this is when we share our hearts and find out, my goodness, I didn't even like her because I thought she was so self-assured and so confident, and we find out she's an absolute mess emotionally. Why? Because we're imbibing a system that says you're somebody according to position in society. And it's not truth. And it's not satisfying. It's a thing thought through, orchestrated out, and brought you into by the powers of darkness that is totally in their control, and you cannot get there. There is no pot of gold. There is no end to it. There is no satisfaction. Because He's made it so that you're 6 inches underwater all your life. That's the way He's designed it. You're always at a funeral. It is a false system of greatness. Billy Graham is great, we think, because he has a broad influence and is well known. That's not truth. If he's great only because A, he's obeying God, and B, he's serving people. And if he's not great. See, Billy Graham's probably a great man, but he's not a great man for the reasons we think he's a great man. We think he's a great man because he's well known. We think he's a great man because he has influence. Charles Manson's well known. Hitler had influence. It's the spirit of the world, folks. And yet we're chasing that tail. And the devil has us chasing our tail, trying to get to somewhere that doesn't exist. Trying to get to something that's not there. A false system of what's important, what's valuable. If I come into a place and start yelling things around, and you say, who is this guy? Who is this? Who is he the guy think he is? What? Loud mouth coming in here. Who does he think he is? Who is that? Anybody know who that is? And somebody says, well, I don't know who he is, but he just drove up here in a Rolls Royce. Who is that? Who is he? Immediately, the interest is different. Now, friends, that is not truth. That is the spirit of the world. We have imbibed a false system of what is important, what is great, what makes you somebody. Now, not only is it a false system of values, but it is a false basis of acceptance. A false basis of acceptance which gives us an inferiority. And there is nobody listening to me at the present time that has not had a measure of insecurity and inferiority. Most of the things you have done that are sinful have come out of these two roots. These are the biggest things on the planet, and unfortunately, we get saved, friends, and do not deal with these things. We still have a sense of inferiority because we're not sure exactly who we are, because we don't feel accepted by society, because society is governed by a thing called the spirit of the world, which is a false basis of acceptance. What is acceptable in our society? Basically stated, performance. Performance. We get hurt because our husband wasn't made an elder, because position means we're somebody. We get hurt because we cannot perform up to expectation. So the acceptable people in our society are the athletes and the movie stars. And we're all trying to use the same shampoo. We want to swear that we have more hair. And we want more body in our hair. And we want to smoke the cigarette and drive the car that makes us more acceptable. Friends, if you don't believe what I'm telling you today, then take advertising in university. They know what I'm saying to you is the truth. Because when the Marlboro Company puts on a full color spread of a fold-out page in a national magazine and pays almost $1 million to get the advertisement in there, they are not just trying to sell you a tube of weeds. Because if all they were trying to sell you was a tube of weeds, they just rent a little space up there and write in it, "We sell tubes of weeds, buy them please, Marlboro Company." But they go to all the trouble to rent cameras and rent a horse and rent a rider and rent the scene and wait till the right time and have 1,400 takes and get it processed and go through all of this tens of thousands of dollars to put out an advertisement and then buy space for hundreds of thousands of dollars on TV or in the magazine, and they aren't saying, "We hope it works." They know it works. And the reason they know it works is they studied a thing called marketing in university, and marketers in these kind of classrooms shake their head up and down while I'm teaching this because they know they can sell you this thing because they're not trying to sell you a tube of weeds. They're trying to sell you what? An image. And the reason they can is because you don't like the one you have. And the reason you don't like the one you have is because you're imbibing a thing called the spirit of the world that is totally in the hands of the enemy. And to the degree you imbibe it, the love of the Father is not in you. And if the love of the Father is not in you, you don't know who you are, which puts you into a comparison thing. Advertising is built on what? Envy. You look at the ad, you see the sophisticated person beside the Ford. And you want the Ford because you want sophistication. Okay? And it works, friends. We laugh at it, but it works. It works on you every day. But the reason it works is because you don't like the image you've got. So you envy the image. Your envy brings you to compare. When you compare, you're always coming up short. So then you begin to compete. All the competition we have in the body of Christ, friends, it's rife. One of our greatest problems, competing, keeping up with the Joneses, being like the other people, having one of those too, going there too, being more acceptable because you've traveled, being more acceptable because you're taller, being more acceptable because you're shorter, being more acceptable because your hair doesn't turn gray. Who said, for instance, that youth was more desirable than age? Where did that come from? Don't talk, just think. Where did it come from? Who started that? Who says youth is more valuable than age? It's the spirit of the world. That's not truth. Truth is not that youth is more desirable than age, but even as Christians, we've into this thing where we fear every wrinkle and every gray hair. We don't want to be old. We want to be young because somebody said youth is more desirable than age. Who said that? It's the spirit of the world. It's designed to keep you in insecurity and inferiority all your life. And we even lie about our age or refuse to tell it. Because we're in such a system that says you mustn't be old because being old is less acceptable and being old is less valuable. It's the spirit of the world, friends, keeping us living 6 inches underwater, keeping us chasing after something that isn't there. Blondes have more fun. Wonder how that'd go in Africa. Who starts these things, see? All women are like this. All men are like that. This is the spirit of the world, friends, where we feel like in order to be somebody, to be acceptable, we got to perform. There are acts of immorality by the tens of thousands that will go on tonight, not so much because people enjoy this, but because they feel it makes them more acceptable. That's how bad it is. We want to be acceptable. We want to perform. The acceptable person looks a certain way. In my day, when I was in high school, we had Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield. Remember them? So in order to be a real woman, you had to be big. Everything had to be big. And people were stuffing things everywhere to be big. Then we went into the 60s and Twiggy came along. And now, would you believe, the greatest neurosis in the earth amongst females is anorexia. By the hundreds of thousands, people are starving themselves to death to be acceptable. Friends, we are being taken for a ride here. And I'm all for health and strength. But I want to tell you, friends, a lot of what's happening in the bodybuilding thing is simply a spirit of the world to be more acceptable. Suntans can make you more acceptable. I tell you, when I go onto a beach, it's cruel. I find there's racial prejudice right there on the beach. When people see a genuine white man, they ooh and ah and talk about you hurting their eyes and all kinds of cruel and brutal things. It's terrible, because we live in a society that says the browner you are, the more acceptable you are. Now, who started that? Okay? And then I can take you to places in New Guinea and places in Africa, listen to this, where it's the lightest person who's the most acceptable. What are we doing, folks? We are chasing a pot of gold at the end of the proverbial rainbow that we can never make. We can never get there. Because it is a system that has been thought through by the enemy to keep you in inferiority all your life. Because as long as you're in inferiority, you'll compare and you'll compete and you'll feel hurt and you'll feel deprived because you're not tall enough, you're not rich enough, you're not acceptable enough, you can't perform enough, you can't sing, you can't dance, you're not sexual enough, you're not enough of a man, you're not a man's man. What is that? How tall is it? How many hair does it have on its chest? And we're doing all kinds of things, buying four-wheel drive trucks with big tires and rifles over the back window that we don't use 4 times a year because we're trying to be somebody and be more acceptable. And on I could go for the next 5 hours. And friends, it's not truth. And it's the spirit of the world. God doesn't care if you have a 4-wheel drive truck. That's not the issue. He doesn't care if you have 6 of them. He cares if you need it. God doesn't care if you have a great big motorcycle, a leather jacket, and 1 earring. He cares if you need to have that to be somebody, because that's sad, because that's the spirit of the world. It's not worldly to have 1 earring. It's worldly to need to have it to be somebody. You see the difference? Don't say that you need to be poor or you need to be rich. The issue is, do you need to be it to be somebody? Now, when I tell this to teenagers, I call this message 2 ways of looking in the mirror. How many of you have a mirror at home? And how many of you look in that mirror regularly and a lot? So what's the answer to a false value system and a false basis of acceptance? The answer, friends, is the other line in 1 John 5:19. The whole world lies in the power of the evil one, but we know we are of God. We know we are of God. The next time you look in the mirror, here's what you're to see. Because you've been looking in the mirror and you've been coming up short. I'll tell you why. How many of you have a mirror at home, and how many of you look in it? Now, how many of you have ever looked in that mirror and said, now that is the way it ought to be? There it is, folks. That is the epitome. Have you ever done that? Has anybody ever done that, honestly, without pride and arrogance? Isn't that interesting to you that nobody has ever looked in the mirror and said, there it is. That's it. That's the way it ought to be. Do you know why? Because when you look in the mirror, you always feel like there could be improvement. And that's not just the mirror of your physical appearance. That's a symbol of your whole life. You have never looked in the mirror of life and said, there it is. That's it, folks. That's the way people ought to be, is right there. Just like my life. Nobody has ever honestly said that. Do you know why? Because the devil has done a number on us to a man. Every human being on the planet has done a number on us called the spirit of the world, and he's caused us to look into the mirror of life or into the mirror of our physical appearance and always come up short. Because why? We compare ourselves. And what you're learning today is what you're comparing yourself to is an illusion. It doesn't exist. It's something that Satan has projected that's there that really isn't even there. It's a place you're trying to get to that doesn't exist. He's planned it that way. You never will be accepted on that route. You never will feel valuable on that route. You never do make it.